Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Today is January 19th of 2022 and is the mock meeting, and I will pass it over to Jeremy.
All right, everyone, let's see, it was a tight agenda. I'll just go straight forward with really what I think the big item is, at least one I really want to share with everyone and get the discussion going, because it's a big one, kind of answers some of the other things in the agenda. And if you can see here, it's a new HIP. No number yet, of course, because it hasn't been accepted in there. But the idea is calling it vendor H&T lockup. So I was talking with Scott about what we're going to do with manufacturers who go awry. You know, that scenario that we had with Codex, and it was really hard to manage. Still is hard to manage. Don't want to keep that process. Really would like to make it like an economic incentive that makes it very clear that abusing your privileges for onboarding keys has consequences, community consequences. So the idea is that all vendors, new and old, will be required to stake or deposit H&T into an account of some form that the community controls via a tribunal process. And the details about how much to deposit and for how long and when it comes back, that's all stuff that needs to be worked out. But essentially, we want to make it so that you have to deposit an amount equal to or greater than what you could possibly make gaming the system by misbehaving with your privileges. That way, there's really no business incentive to work in any other way than in the goals of the network. So there's a lot going behind that, a lot of the details, like I said, but things that we do really need to agree on together. And again, this will be HIP, so this will be something we forward to the entire community. But the mock will probably have a role in this. The idea is, you know, after we establish how much vendors need to post, we have to also go into how to treat existing vendors and how the new vendors have to fall into this, and really kind of a tribunal system, which is that, you know, we really want it to be evidence-based, that if there is misbehavior, I have high confidence of it, and in the end, the tokens in that account are slashed or rediverted in some way. They do not go back to the manufacturer. And how do we do that in a way that is fair? And also, how do we treat vendors who've done well? You know, eventually these are kind of like a deposit. It should go back to the vendor for good behavior and be some sort of rolling window. And more on that tribunal side, what we're kind of thinking is, you know, the mock maybe will be the judge, sort of sitting at the trial and listening to evidence presented by other sides, and perhaps the POC working group, which we're still standing up, will sort of be the prosecutor. They will go through and do whatever analysis they do to help come to the conclusion that you know, manufacturers misbehaving, and the mock will say yes or no based on the evidence they see, whether they think it is worthwhile or not. That's sort of the idea. That way, no single party is in charge of both gathering the evidence and making the judgment. You know, I really like this kind of idea of adversarial justice, where each party in that system has a specific role, and it doesn't affect your bias in gathering data or your ability to weigh it. You know, you get really heavily invested when you're the investigator. You just keep pushing forward, trying to find evidence that fits your case, but may not necessarily be the truth. So that's the whole thing wrapped up.
You may jump in?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. You've got some opinions.
Yeah, so I think the way that I've been thinking about this is like we need to have some stick for manufacturers. You know, gaming in general, we're trying to combat this from a number of different areas in terms of how we deploy a lot more resources to the analytics side. I really, you know, it bums me out how much time Jeremy has had to put into Codex, and you know, there's some other potential bad actors that need evaluation, and I don't want the analysis work, and I don't want this to fall into the mock or any member of the mock. It's an awful lot of work. So that's where we've had this, you know, separate POC working group that I want to be a lot more analysis driven. So I think one of the things that we've been working through is kind of like, number one, how much to lock up and the justification for that. Again, trying to have some math and some logic behind that in a way that is not overly burdensome, that we're going to turn away manufacturers. We also have to, you know, make sure that the cost is not passed on to the actual consumers. So this is where what I'd like to do is actually have something that is at a draft stage that we can socialize this with Bobcat, Rack, Freedom Fi, any of these producers that we feel a high degree of confidence have been good actors in the ecosystem and would fully endorse this and say, look, we want to make sure we are helping to build a network that is high integrity, honest. We're in for this. So figuring out what exactly that number looks like. We've been floating around kind of that 1 to 1.5 million mark in US dollar equivalent of tokens. With some kind of decayed way that those tokens can be repaid. Something else that we've been considering is, hey, if we realize there's a bad actor and another manufacturer or another provider wants to take on the management of those hotspots in the field, can we actually use those tokens to provide some capital contribution towards whoever's taking on the ownership of managing those, if necessary. Another element is beyond the lockup and the justification is the backward looking and forward looking treatment. I don't want to go to Bobcat with somebody out in the field and say, you suddenly owe us or have to lock up multi-million dollars. It's just it's a surprise. So I want to make sure we're trying to do something that's fair for what we believe to be an honest actor in the ecosystem. So the treatment backward versus forward could be different. I think it's fine as long as we try to do something that's even across the board. The other thing that's kind of the tough question is, what constitutes what is a high confidence in cheating? I think initially it would need to be overwhelming evidence that the manufacturer is cheating themselves or is clearly a party to cheating. We're talking like almost unanimous in the community, in a POC working group, in the MOC, everybody would look at this and say, absolutely unequivocally, there's cheating. What I don't want is to have trial after trial on things that there is some level of subjectivity or people who are just shouting, hey, look, I found funny thing on coverage map, penalize, burn their tokens. We can't do that. We're just going to get sucked into this void of debating every single small thing. So I want to err towards the side of a high degree. It's more about just making sure that there's a carrot that exists to prevent just the disincentive to exist for manufacturers to stop the behavior and slow it. That's what's really important to me, is at least just having that there in place where we're not going to suddenly start burning tokens left and right, but we need a starting point. And I think this goes back to perfect being the enemy of good. We can't design everything, but let's try to figure out what we can roll this out initially. And as far as the tribunal, and then I'll stop. DY can act as a kind of trusted party and a custodian initially to hold tokens. I do want to figure out a path to how this is, a multi-sig managed on a rotating committee potentially, but I don't think that's the biggest issue right now. I don't think it's the thing we have to design for. I'm stopping because I see two hands. So Nick, you're up first.
Yeah, go Nick.
Oh, let's see if I can turn the hand off. So I guess the first big question is, how much does a manufacturer stand to make by cheating? Because that is probably, if not unreasonable, to pay, at least a reasonable place to start as far as a stake.
Yeah, so that was the very first paragraph that I've written in this, and the major section of actually trying to come through an objective equation or process. The basic mechanics do seem to be that a cheating hotspot is basically one that's performing perfectly in the system. Right now can get anywhere from 1 to 2 H&T a day. If we say maybe 2 H&T a day, then you have to factor in that it does, token does have a market price for a lot of people. So you kind of convert that into dollars, and I don't know where we are at. Let's say that's $60 a day per hotspot. And of course, if they were left to do this in perpetuity, there was no deny list, the amount that they could make is infinite. Of course, it's limited by time. But the other bookend to this is that we expect eventually to be something like HIP 40, so that really egregious cheating will eventually be caught on, just banned. And that hotspot will be taken out of action. So we kind of come up with a rough figure. Let's say that it takes a month for the cheating to be discovered and really get to the point where the ban list can take over. We want to disincentivize that month for per hotspot. So you do that math, you get 2 H&T, you get 60 H&T per hotspot. Essentially would be what a manufacturer could expect to make at the moment by cheating, which is a lot. What do you get? 60 H&T, and then say you're going to onboard 10,000 hotspots. right?
Yeah.
In a typical batch. So that's 60,000 HNT.
600 that well, $600,000 in that math
Yeah, exactly.
in a month.
And I thought it would be more.
600,000 HNT.
No, if you're
No.
talking about 2 HNT per day at 30 per HNT right now, so that's 60 per hotspot in US dollars. So then across 10,000 hotspots, that's how you get to the 600,000 US dollars in a month.
I think
of
it's
gaming.
No, right?
600.
No, we're talking about 2 HNT a day,
Yeah.
60 HNT a month.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's not all of
600,000 HNT a month for
10,000.
10,000 hotspots.
That's a huge.
So yeah, that's a huge amount, right? Because that's 60,000 HNT, and then if you multiply it, let's just say times 30, you're talking $18 million, right? That is a huge ask. Scott, are you on board? Do you understand how we went from that? I want to make certain you caught the math.
Yeah, wait, 2 HNT per day. I'm saying that's $60 per day,
No,
right?
Okay.
We're talking about month numbers. We're multiplying by 30 days.
Okay. Anyway, okay, carry on.
Yeah, I think if you do it either way, if you do it in USD or tokens, it comes out to 18 million or 600,000.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's 2 HNT times 30, 60 HNT a month per hotspot, 10,000 hotspots.
Okay, I was just doing it in dollars. So yeah, we
Okay.
come to the same number. Yep.
All right, good. I want
18
everybody to be
million.
comfortable with that. So that's a huge ask. So it probably has to be tuned down. So maybe we sort of rely on the fact that it's the entire amount that would get slashed, even if it was only a portion of your fleet caught cheating. That portion is enough to be visible as cheating. Your risk is the entire amount gets slashed. So on the flip side, if you were to take your entire 10,000 hotspots and put them into a cheat net, it'd probably be rapidly detectable. So we'd say you wouldn't expect to be able to have 10,000 hotspots cheating for a month.
Per month.
Right? It'd probably be a lot less. So if we have perhaps tuned it down, these are rough numbers, to like basically whatever $1.5 million is for every 10,000 hotspots being onboarded, that might be kind of the right price point in there. It's not too crazy an ask, but it's enough that you have significant amount of risk. It should still be enough to deter you from any incentive that you could possibly hope to get under the wire. It's definitely up for question.
Say that number again, Jeremy.
Say again, Sophie.
Say that number again.
1.5 million USD per 10,000 hotspots onboarded.
Okay.
It's a rough guess.
Does anyone else have a different idea? Because the thing that's kind of the elephant in the room is that HNT, the price will go up and down. So the price goes to 100 or 60 or 20. Like these are very, very different numbers.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about it is if we just do it in terms of HNT, that takes care of itself, right? And that's why you start the equation. You can expect to make this much per day for hotspot. The moment, now as the network grows in size, that amount goes down. Yeah. Sophie.
So does that just logistically, would that happen when the manufacturer pays for the hotspot to come online?
Yeah, we kind of need some probably rolling scheme. So, we don't want to bottleneck hotspots coming online. What would likely happen is we kind of keep a running tab. Once a month, we have some sort of batch job on our side that looks at how many hotspots have been onboarded. And we remind you, hey, you're getting really close to your limit of what you've staked. If we get no response, 2 weeks later, their maker key gets revoked and all onboarding stops. So there'd be sort of the grace period, but it's it has to be, you have to deposit this based on the number onboarded, and you get there's some delay in when you actually get charged and when you get really cut off for not responding.
What do we do about startups?
Yeah.
I think that's a problem, because then it means that we just give the network only to big players, which creates monopoly, and it's really not what we want. I think perhaps like what I've seen done in other situations that delineate between startups and non-startups is saying a startup is, you've been in business, I'm just using this as an example, you've been in business for less than 5 years, you're pulling in less than $250,000 a year in revenue. Therefore, the rules are different.
The question is, are they less likely to cheat? we should only give preference if there's like a scenario where they're heavily aligned in some way that the incentives wouldn't work out for them, like
So
the cheating incentive wouldn't work out. But
really quickly, the way that I think about, it's again, like this is why we had this tiered system. It's like for every 10,000 hotspots, because, startups are going to produce, lower quantities than what a large provider would. And I think there's also something to be said about the fact of we want, even if you're a startup, like you need to be well capitalized to support this network. I think we've seen where, businesses that are not, well capitalized and don't have if you don't have the support teams in place, you don't have the proper distribution in place. It's not that I'm trying to cut out small teams. I want to make sure that like teams can perform, period, regardless of whether you're large or small. So I think that, tiering that across, if you're only going to manufacture 10,000, fine. Like you only have to actually lock up this amount. You're going to end up producing 100,000. It just bumps up as you do. So that's kind of one way to combat it. Sorry, Brad.
Yeah, well, I got a couple maybe points at different levels. So first, just to close off on, I think this train of thought, I think the way you're proposing it is proportional to the number of units you're going to put on the network. I don't know that you can justify having a different rule for a startup versus a large company, but I think the startup, is going to be gated by how many units they can build. Taking a kind of a step back, I think we need to figure out when you have to pay, and obviously paying proportionally as a manufacturer is actually shipping and selling units is going to be much easier for their kind of cash flow ability to have the funds to go do this. So I guess there's a question maybe to Jeremy. I mean, you already have to burn HNT, to get the enough credits for your onboarding, of your hotspots to begin with. Can this be just like a parallel transaction at that time? So if you go burn HNT for 1,000 units, you also have to stake a certain amount of HNT simultaneously. And then that way it kind of always tracks each other of how many data credits you have. There's already enough money staked, and the manufacturers can kind of manage that as they're actually shipping and selling units to help their cash flow scenario.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that could be done as an on-chain thing. We'd have to get the blockchain team to code up something. It would probably involve some blockchain variables to set the amount that needs to be staked there. I think that's sort of a mechanics thing. It could be done that way. I guess the bigger question is the community on board with the general idea that it costs a certain amount per hotspot to the manufacturer? And that's the big key.
and so I'll take a step even farther back, just high level, so I totally agree. And Jeremy, again, we appreciate that. God knows how many hours you spent, managing the scenario that you're dealing with. We have to do something to address this. And I think this is a good idea, right, to go pursue. The one thing I'll throw out, so Sophie highlighted the problem for the startup. I'll highlight that anything involving this kind of transaction for the established communications equipment manufacturers who may be publicly traded may throw barriers to having, those types of players continue to participate. And, how do they come to market? Like, in fact, some of the players that are already probably approved and participating, I expect they'll have a lot of questions, and their corporate legal will have to look at this. And, so when we think about that, is there an intermediate play, kind of like a validator that maybe could come in to help those types of companies provide that assurance to us and the network, but maybe remove them directly from the transaction if that became a problem for their corporate lawyers?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing we can think about. Get on to Felipe.
So one main point is to make sure that whatever it's decided and is implemented is future-proofed. We were talking about HNT variation, but also the production changes. Right now, what a hotspot produces today in a month, it's totally different than what it was 6 months ago. So I would look at this in obtaining a formula that's totally automatic. Let's say the math we did.
Yeah, let me get to that. I've actually done that, and let me tell you the formula I did kind of come up with. Why I kind of abandoned it. Number one, we don't necessarily have to future-proof it. We can put language in there, say, some management of the community itself sets this on some monthly schedule. It does put us a little bit on the bind if it's the mock that has to come with the formula. It can be done based on the number of hotspots currently on the system, looking back 30 days. But I did find one interesting metric. Joey and I worked on this to try to find a way to make this totally future-proof so it would work for the time being, for even a couple years maybe. And it seems to be that the token price does seem to correlate pretty much to the size of the network, roughly within an order of magnitude, let's say 2 to 3. So I actually found this interesting equation. Basically, the token price appears to be $1 for every 7,000 hotspots on the network. That has held roughly true throughout the last year. So you could use that as a metric. Again,
but my idea was not to index it to the dollar value, regardless of how it falls, because if the token skyrockets, the amount that would have to be staked would skyrocket proportionally, but what they would earn from gaming on 1 month would also skyrocket proportionally. For me, that's not.
So the other way to do this is to simply just say it's number of hotspots currently on the network. We can take the equation, we can say how much you're expecting to get per hotspot is entirely based on how many of the people you're sharing with. Precisely. So every month that metric just it gets calculated, and we say the amount you can get to game, we expect it to be 10 times the average rewards for a hotspot is the other way of doing this metric.
Precisely.
Currently averaging about
10 or 12. We would, for example, what the math we did turned out to end in $18 million. That's, if we could use a tenth of that, it would be 1.8 million. It's more acceptable for the current scenario. And if we calculate how many hotspots are on the network now, that would be end up in having 6 HNT per hotspot to stake. Indexing that to the amount of hotspots as the network grows, so would vary exactly proportional the HNT. If this price of the token skyrockets, so would the rewards anyway.
Yeah,
that's
my good case for
have
why
it fully indexed to the estimated rewards and to the number of hotspots in the network.
Yeah, keeping it locked to HNT seems to be a really good idea. That way, a lot of these other things that we can't control do balance out, and trying to do it based on USD does seem really hard. No one else has their hand raised? Nick's got a few more. Throw your things in that you've been typing.
I've been typing some stuff. So I think what I'm seeing is that despite having a bunch of smart people in the room here, this type of, I don't know, like game and economic theory is probably not anyone's background, unless you guys have some secret schooling I don't know about, which is totally possible. And maybe we find someone who actually has a specialty in this and say, like, look, we've got this problem. We know that we need to solve it, but we're not really sure of the mechanics of how to solve it. And rather than putting our kind of brain power, which is not maybe trained for this, against this, we can move on to other pieces and bring in some expert who can help them. I'm not tied to that idea, but I think rather than us trying to invent the wheel, there's probably someone out there who's like, oh, this is probably how you should do this.
Yeah, but ultimately this is going to be a hip, but we, want the mock to be comfortable with the general idea. So yeah, the idea was not to fix everything in this call and get it all nailed down and then submit it out. So it's cool. Scott, what have you got? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Plus one, and Nick and I threw it in the chat of, like, this is a good thing as far as how we think about like next members in the committee and who else we can get around like different domain expertise. I think that I don't want to spend the entire meeting on this. What I'd love to do is, Jeremy, if we can kind of share the draft of where we are for everybody to review. I'm totally happy that if people want to jump on another call. I also would love to try to socialize this with, again, like at a very, very high level, to talk to a couple of folks at some of the like more trusted, honest providers, just to get kind of like their sentiment at a high level, how they'd feel about it. And then, I don't think, as much as I'd love for this to be ready for presenting at the community call next week, I don't think it's going to be able to. So what I'd rather do is say, like, let's share out the draft HIP. Let's get some thoughts on this, which we can discuss async in the actual committee channel on Discord. And then I would love to, maybe Jeremy and you and I can do this together if anybody else wants to be involved with it, have some kind of one-to-one discussions with some of the top providers of, how do you feel about this? We think this is good for the network. Are you comfortable with this number? And can we get some assurances that you're not going to raise prices from to the consumer, at least as a next step?
Yeah, I think it's good. Brad, final words.
Yeah, just a real quick follow-up to what Nick said. So I kind of see, based on what you see, there's really two things here. Like, one is there a fundamentally different approach that accomplishes the same goals? And maybe there's a call out as part of the HIP. I think there always is. Hey, if other people have good ideas that are fundamentally different, that is, let's get those in here. And then the other part is just like fine tuning what you've already proposed. And then, I think we actually have to, run some models and simulations there to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences. And maybe, to Nick's call out for other experts, there's maybe two different classes of people that we need to solicit inputs from.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So that's just generally what that's called. H&T lockup or whatever. When we talk about this in the future, it probably is the best wording to use for that. That way everybody understands it. Let's move on.
Jeremy, do you mind if I post the Notion link, or do you want to give that another?
Yeah, no,
scan
you're
before?
certainly welcome to. I just don't know if people can see it.
Oh,
So it's been drafted in this thing called Notion. I should copy it out to Google Docs once it's done. You're welcome to, though.
Okay.
Let's see if people can read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right here
Right.
on this call.
Okay, we can move on though.
Cool. All right, so let's see. The next thing on the agenda here is just talking about a sentiment change, and I think I know what this is about. I think I may even put this on here. So we've just seen a lot of manufacturers applying who, for better for worse, are mining operations, and that makes me really nervous. And I'm getting to the point where I see these requests, these KYC requests, from manufacturers who basically say, "Oh yeah, we've made the best Bitcoin miner. We have these mining farms." I don't feel those manufacturers are going to do a good job and are, again, economically aligned to basically cheat the network and do hosting farms. I've seen that for some of our existing manufacturers have started that way, and I don't think it's going well. It's kind of leading to where we're getting to this H&T lockup. So I'm getting to the point where I see these new requests. I'm probably going to vote no. I feel we should dedicate our efforts to preferring manufacturers who have a history of actually operating radios, have done something in the radio space or the IoT space or cellular space. So that's what this agenda item is, just kind of telling my sentiment that I'm going to start being real picky on the KYC and warning other people think about kind of generally shifting our priority. We've got a lot of manufacturers now. There's quite a bit of variation. Is it okay to be picky and really say, look, I don't think you're a good fit for the network unless you've really demonstrated you're in the radio space. I think it's really important.
Can I add to that sentiment too?
Yeah.
I think we can raise the bar on manufacturers' plans for customer support. If you don't really have a legitimate plan for customer support, then I think we need to really use our authority to decide whether we want to let you bring a new product into the network, because as we know, you look at the community feedback and the challenges that are out there. The whole ecosystem needs to do a better job around that. And just bringing in a lot new miners with no customer support plan that are just shipping product into some country or market, I think it just makes the current problems worse.
Yeah, Sophie.
Agree with Brad. Also, all of this is in the ethics doc. So perhaps we figure out a way to make that a gate, whether or not we let manufacturers in or out. And I agree about the mining farms. I would also vote no on any company that.
Yeah, I mean, we're all free to vote as you'd like, but I'm just providing how I'm starting to see it.
But I think those things almost go hand in hand, right? Because if you're building a mining farm, you don't really need customer support, right? If you're really building a product that you're going to support the community with, then you need customer support. So it's kind of like a little red flag, like just an email address as support at some new website. Like, what's your staffing plans? Like, do you have a Discord channel or a forum, or show me your installation guide, or like some of the basics just aren't there from some of the current manufacturers or applicants.
Yeah, and I know this kind of delves into the region of like, do you want to be in charge of how you handle your customers and whatnot? But I can say from a very objective standpoint, we want to make certain that the network size is legitimate. Like, every hotspot out there is functioning and can at least do proof of coverage and can do especially LoRa transfers for the LoRa component, right? So I'm totally on board with being able to say, look, you kind of need to show us that these hotspots will be durable in whatever manner, so they continue to function. Fine with that.
Pete, and again, we're not policing this, but I think at least for a new manufacturer, showing us a plan that looks like it's reasonable is a reasonable bar to hold them accountable.
We can remember that. Scott, again, I think you're in the queue at least.
Yeah. So I mean, I just kind of want to talk about the fact of, I've been trying to think about how this got worked into things around like the charter, the ethics doc, and it just comes back to, again, this is where I talked to Jim about, it's a change in sentiment. Initially, we were trying to be as open as possible. We were trying to really bootstrap coverage and growth, and now just the demand is so absolutely wild that we can start. I think that this group, this committee, can start to have a lot more subjective judgment on just our individual assessments, and that can reflect in the vote. So I am very much all for the fact of, do we want to see that you've got some industry expertise, some history working in this? We want to really reduce the speculators and the opportunistic votes who are coming in that don't have any background in this, don't have any history of working with customers. I think that any of these things that are coming in existing farming and mining operations, it's very, very opportunistic. And I think we really want to make sure that as the network keeps growing, we want to minimize those opportunists and optimize for anything that is going to have the right types of, they're delivering hardware, they're keeping their promises, they're supporting their customers, because all this gets back to network integrity and the ability for people to feel like that I can rely on using Helium and I can contribute in a way that I'm not getting gamed or taken advantage of by opportunists. So to me, I think this just solves naturally through, there's a lot of smart people in this committee, and if 2/3 feel like this is absolutely somebody who's going to provide good products, good service, let's let them in, then that's fine. I don't think we have to have like very specific outlined rules for every single instance. So I'm a fan of it.
However, we would need to have a gate at the beginning so that we don't bring people all the way through to the, the final step. By the time the mock gets to vote, it's a manufacturer has been in conversation with Christina and the rest of other people here for 3 months or so. So perhaps we would do that step at KYC.
Yeah, it really does sound like it's a KYC function, because that's where I'm seeing a lot of the information about this come about. Where someone says, hey, I'm an excellent contributor, you should consider me because of all of my mining experience. And to me, that's the red flag. Felipe, I'm going to check out for a second, Scott.
Yeah, basically, the sooner we can implement any control to take out the weeds of the process, and the better we save time, because we have the Christina on the talking back and forth. We have the audits that have to be performed. If we know upfront, if we can fine tune the requirements to become an effective contributor to the workspace, to the whole community, the sooner we take them out and we only leave the ones we consider that meet those requirements in the process, the more work we save for everybody.
Scott, good.
Yeah, so one, I just want to reframe. I think we need to call this a diligence process. KYC is something that's very, this is just something that we just should reframe in general. KYC is usually geared towards more financial products. We called it this initially because we were doing background checks. We were like kind of verifying identity. I think that so much of this is just diligence on a company. So what I would probably suggest, and Christina, let me know your thoughts, is let's rework what this looks like. So you're actually doing a lot of this diligence up front, and then we can, effectively weed these things out, and it saves everybody's time, both the company where we say, look, this is just not a fit here, and for any of the auditing and for other participants in the mock. So let's rework the process and the order flow.
What'd you have, Christine?
Yeah, no, I was just going to kind of go off of what Scott was just saying, that, yeah, for the KYC, we have, I think, 54 people that filled out that public diligence document. And there's definitely ones where I can see, just by reading their HIP 19, that they are probably one of the ones we could pull. But it's just a matter of that, I guess, wanting to also have like a permissionless network. But, if we're changing the sentiment, is it something where I just pull them, or would the mock prefer that I put them in the mock just to say, hey, we have this application?
I think it's clear we've got to vote on it. It's just putting the voting earlier. So then I can just start pulling those ones that look like, hey, these are red flags, and then sticking them in the chat for everybody to kind of take like a look at. I think it's a start, but we clearly, Want to make it a process though, and so it does sound
Yeah.
like maybe it's just like kind of like, yeah, like Nick just put in the chat, a dual vote process. Essentially, first level, yeah, you look okay, we're not going to deny you based on that, and then second is all right, everything really does check out. I think that's more the sentiment. It's just that we have to get involved earlier.
And perhaps the mock diligence section is, only three people on the mock need to vote.
To kind of, it takes that to reach a threshold to deny, essentially.
Correct. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, 3 or 4, whatever the process is, make it.
Oh, right. I see. To make it so that it's a default to continue, but we have to keep on top of it as a group to.
Right.
Yeah, that seems like a good midway.
Yeah.
I think we're all in consensus there.
Great.
What do we want to do to go through the existing process? I mean, we should all kind of look at the applicants who feel they're ready to at least start phase 1 of this mock diligence and go through them, make certain we've all done it. So call to action there.
As a suggestion that we can riff off of, everybody here would sign up for, say, 2 Mondays a month to do an overview and an internal yes/no for the beginning.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Well, I think we can carry that on. Oh, Nick, you got something? Do that while I'm reading the next agenda item.
Yep, I'm just got a kind of question as a non-expert dude. Is I'd like to help with that, but some of the stuff looking at the documents so far, I'm just not sure what I'm looking at, and I think we're talking about this already, but having some kind of yes/no stuff in there that makes it really easy for the non-technical people to give an informed vote, where we say, do you have any LoRaWAN experience? If it's a no, maybe that's just a no to bring it on board. And we have these kind of really straightforward barriers to entry for people who are really unlikely to succeed. So in other.
Yeah, my opinion is just, it's more, do you show experience not only in computational power, but the other part of this is really, we're not a proof of work system. We don't require you to have super beefy miners. Do you approach this as a business where you are actually more in the IoT space or in the radio space or communication space is really what we want to see first. And then your ability to create products around it is second, clearly. But your ability just to create a raw CPU or maybe even ASICs not necessary, not needed, and really does kind of illustrate, if you're approaching the problem from that perspective, you're more likely to think of this as a mining operation and completely ignore or downplay the radio part as much as you can. So again, want to see evidence that they're IoT or communications or radio. Any one of those or all 3 is excellent, or cellular even.
Yeah, so I've actually got a fair amount of experience in this from another lifetime. Is thinking about, are there 2 to 3 things? We've used kind of 2 sets of 2 before as a part of a program that assessed whether or not people were ready to go through some difficult physical training. And we gave them 2 tests, a physical and a mental test. If they failed both, they didn't get to come to the training. And so I'm looking for something like that, where there's 2 or 3 things that are, if they're all a no, it's really clear that it's not going to be a good fit at all. And that just makes the workload a lot easier for all of us to kind of go through and say, hey, this is going to work or not. So if we can find those 3 things, I don't know what they are, 2 things, that might just eliminate a bunch of the chaff coming through.
I mean, I encourage everyone to think on their own what it means. I don't know if we can be or need to be proscriptive about what exactly the criteria are. It's just using your gut check. Notice that there definitely are companies that are into this. It's like they're going to go in, they're going to deploy in basements. Just you can see it's sort of a sentiment in their wording. Do they really want to be part of the IoT space? And just looking through their proposal, I think should be rather easy. So it's kind of hard to say what any particular one thing is, but I think we're all at least experienced with the network enough to know what that means. It's my suggestion. Just kind of free for all. Jump in. I can't keep track of all the answers.
Yeah, just real quick. I think you kind of know it when you see it. I mean, for me personally, it's more looking at the completeness of their business plan that they're coming into. Again, is it an established company? What's their origin? I mean, you don't have to be a LoRaWAN company to do this, but you need to be a company that's done some type of electronics product, communication product. You have to, have a handle on supply chain. You have to have a plan for customer support, right? So like, I think we can come up with some general categories, but we don't have to be super prescriptive. And, maybe it helps us in the voting process. Like, it's you guys are already doing a lot of this stuff today, but to Scott's point, I think we can be a little bit more subjective in looking at these applications and asking some additional questions up front to make sure we get companies who want to build great products and support their customers. I mean, that's my threshold, right? And they're not in it, to build products for themselves or one of their, closely held partners and nobody else, right?
Yeah, Felipe. Yeah, somehow.
Yeah, still from my part, I agree with Nick on the part that we need to be able to automate our decision process, because for now, our gut feeling allows us to do the checks, and we can start by that. If the meetings are at the same time as our mock meeting, I can join. No issue to help brainstorming and see what we decide, but we must start putting the thresholds of the questions or the requirements, like Brad just said. If it has any experience in the communications or the wireless industry, if it has experience in the IoT, to safeguard the possibility of having startups joining, we can accept joint ventures or cooperation with an established manufacturer of some part that sponsors or that's connected to the startup that wants to launch the helium miner. But if we are able to start thinking about those questions, we can do it offline and start bouncing ideas. But of those requirements, that would automatically take part of the applicants, and then we would vote on the remaining ones based on our feeling from the background we do on them to make the rest of this decision. But on the long run, and I'm expecting the number of applicants to continue growing. The more our network grows, the more applicants we will be having. At least submitting the initial part of the HIP-19 process. We've had cases that companies were formed the day they submitted the HIP-19. For me, that's a red flag immediately. So if we are able to, in the next weeks, months, whatever, but at least start thinking in this set of characteristics that are immediate red flags, it will help us make our decision process more sustained.
Yeah, I think we're totally on board. We're just going to put ourselves in a little earlier in the process. One, to prevent someone getting through who clearly doesn't fit it, and two, any company wasting their time going all the way to getting all these certifications only for us to say, look, we didn't think you were a good fit in the first place. I think that's all we're going to do here is really get in there earlier. We're only slated for 75 minutes. So Scott, do it. I'm going to start trying to juggle these things to get stuff that we really need to make decisions on. So I may reorder the agenda.
Yep. All I was going to say is, Christina, if you can just kind of outline and put something in as far as here's the new process flow, and just tuck that into the channel so we can all be on the same page as far as here's how we'll go, and here's how we'll vet, and just what is that going to look like, and we can discuss it there. So that's it.
Cool. Brad, you got this next thing on here. You feel it's a super important question to solve right now. Do you need clarity on the boundaries and definitions for what a DY manufacturer is, or you think we could table it for a second?
I'll just make one comment. In the chat, hopefully you guys kind of read what I said. The one thing for me, and particularly as this market gets more mature, we're going to see more manufacturers coming in. And to be specific, the company that applies for the HIP-19 and we hold accountable, right? That's the hotspot manufacturer. A lot of those companies, or more of those companies, are going to come in bringing in hardware that's coming from more of an ODM, if you guys are familiar with that term. So the reality, so the reality is, in the electronics that you buy, you go to Best Buy and you buy a Wi-Fi router, you buy a Linksys, or you buy a whatever brand. The person who made that PCB subassembly is probably Foxconn or Quanta or one of the high volume consumer electronics manufacturers. And in fact, it's the Foxconns and the Quantas that do most of the work on the electronics design. They take it through certification. It's really the Linksys or the Netgear company, who's what we know as the brand, they really finish the productization effort. They add their software. They're the ones who are standing behind the product. Legally, those are the ones who are providing the customer support. So for me personally, I don't have a super high bar if a manufacturer comes in and they're saying, look, we're not hardware experts. We're not going to do all the hardware layout ourselves and all that kind of stuff, but we're working with an established company that has done those types of products. And that's fine by me. What I care is the product that applies for HIP will be held accountable for the customer experience around the product, all the things we've already been talking about. So I just wanted to add that clarification, like just because somebody says, hey, I'm working with a manufacturing partner on the RF layout, that might be totally okay, but they need to share with us, and they don't have to necessarily make it public. They need to share with the MOC who that manufacturing partner is, and we need to make sure that then that manufacturing partner is an established, credible player that can do the RF and the certification and the layout and all that kind of stuff.
My quick answer to like what is ultimately the manufacturer, I think that is the entity in control of the keys, the onboarding the keys, and the one who's paying the staking fees. That's who's responsible there. Yeah. Hopefully that can be enough there.
Although there's a little confusion with with
CalChip and Rack maybe.
Yeah. But anyway, we can move on.
Okay.
Good point, also.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say this item here about suspected gaming hotspots by Maker and what action should we take. I think we've kind of talked about that as the H&T lockup as a proposal. So unless there's any urgent issues you think we need to change that, I'm going to strike that one here. Cool. Pressing issues. Let's just go through stuff that really have questions, and then I'll move back. Radio certifications, what are we requiring of China? Is this your question, Christina?
Yeah, there was a question that a manufacturer had asked, like what specifically is the regulatory body that they should be getting, like how we have FCC and CE. And that's something I wasn't sure about. So I just wanted to see if we can maybe kind of clarify some of the radio requirements.
I think we're all kind of under the assumption that every country has a central body that we can identify. If there's not that in that case, clearly then this is the question. I think there is a state radio committee or something within China, the SRC.
Yeah, I think they can have an optional certification. It's not mandatory, but they have the certification for the companies that want to do it. We have a manufacturer that even took it, right?
Yeah. So far it's been optional, at least under Chinese law. I'm okay for the MOC saying, look, we do this for every country. Please find your regulatory body and apply, even if it's optional for you under our rules. So everybody cool with that?
I agree.
Okay, that seems unanimous. Awesome. Okay, good job. Let's see, which is more important about the hotspots for deployment? We have about 25 minutes, 20 minutes.
Can I can weigh in really quickly on
go ahead,
that thing about as far as the rules for allowing manufacturers to build their own and deploy. So I don't like that. That's something that we like. I don't think we can set rules for that. I think it's very, very hard for us to enforce. I think it would be more interesting of like, if it's something like, so like, I think KS Technologies might be an example of this, where I think that they're looking to actually use that within like their own supply chain around, if I recall correctly, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn on this, is that they do, there's refrigeration. I think they were actually doing like vaccine transport. So, if they're actually using it for a legitimate use case and they can share, here's the use case, here's information on the geographic deployments, here's other stakeholders that are involved with this. If they share that and there's nothing that's like fishy or a significant departure from that, we don't see any issues. I don't think that that's a problem, because they're actually driving, like there's network utility, there's value there. Those deployments are going to help other use cases. So I think if there's just a presentation, again, within a business case of where they're doing that, like we're not going to be able to enforce and say, hey, you can't like sell hotspots to your own like partner. That's
I think I have an even easier solution for this. We don't necessarily need to get involved. We're just going to say, look, if the H&T lockup does pass as a HIP, one of the things you're going to be judged on in how your deposit gets slashed is, are you in control of the hotspots that are suspected of gaming? That's going to be sort of the criteria, that's going to be the charge that has to be leveled against you. So please note that if you're going to do significant deployments tied back to you as a manufacturer, do note that's a higher risk for you. And I think that solves it.
I would so Scott, I think it's totally okay. And in a way, it's going to help build the ecosystem and the network better. I do think manufacturers should disclose as part of their application. Like, I'm coming in because I'm a product manufacturer and I'm going to go sell this to X, this market, this is my channel. Or I'm building this for my own internal use or exclusively for another partner. That doesn't mean we won't approve it, but it just means you need to disclose so that the community has the right expectation of what that manufacturer is doing, how they're deploying into the network. I think it's reasonable to ask them to disclose.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And then we'll just be able to see if there's a huge departure from that.
Yeah. And I think, again, the lockup is going to be ultimately the arbiter.
Sure. Oh, the lockup is a game
decision.
changer, right? In a lot of ways. So yeah, it negates some of the necessity for sure. But
yeah, cool. All right, cool. Let's see. I think next really big topic is the update on security implementations. And Brad, you wrote this down. Can you kind of phrase this as a question?
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of, so we're getting closer to the migration to light miners. I know we have a number of light miner audits in the queue, and there's other manufacturers looking to build light miners. There's still supply chain issues around the ECC 608 device, the one that's used in the reference design per se that has the I2C interface. So I think there's questions for manufacturers. There's actually a couple pushes into the GitHub repository saying, hey, can we use the one-wire version of the ECC 608? And then there's also the TPM devices that were approved for Freedom Fi. Are those a viable option or something to give some of the manufacturers something to look at where they have supply chain constraints?
Cool.
So,
yeah, I can give you updates on this. I've been involved in some of the conversations. They're mostly done via email. Yeah. So I'm happy to give an update what's going on here. So generally, anybody who wants to use anything other than the 608, we have a process for it, which is, we call it a HIP 19 security amendment. You justify, well, you don't justify, you propose what your security element's going to be. I developed, starting with Freedom Fi, a questionnaire, and Kerlink also undergone this question. There's 20 questions. It literally is 22 questions that you have to answer that kind of cover everything about your design, that show that you're competent, that you're going to design it in a way that covers all of the things that the design needs to do as a security element, not copyable, not transferable by the manufacturer, many other things in there. And if you answer those questions, then there's also, I think we have an additional audit phase. We've asked them, you're going to have to submit a bit more resources, money, to the audit so we can verify this. But there is a process where you can use alternative security schemes, absolutely. Freedom Fi and the TPM, for example, it's not that all TPMs are approved, but the way Freedom Fi proposed to use the existing industry standard TPM is what they had to apply under, because TPM itself can be misused, right? Yeah. So there is a process for it, and Trust Zone is absolutely, if your board can support Trust Zone, and not only support Trust Zone, but it has to support a full secure boot chain, a hardware secure boot chain with signature checking and all of that.
So
does that answer your question?
Just to clarify, so right now, if you use the ECC 608 with the I2C, it's kind of approved by default.
It is, yeah.
Is there a plan with the Miner Lite repository to kind of automatically support other variations, including the one-wire version and possibly the specific TPM chip, a specific TPM part number possibly? Is that in scope? I guess
it is totally in scope. Yeah. As far as the one wire is slower, and Sophie's shaking her head.
We're not done testing.
Oh, okay, we're not done testing. Yeah.
So let's say publicly that it's approved, because it's not. It's in the middle of testing.
There's a question about the one wire, whether it's going to be fast enough for a full hotspot or even faster for slow. The point here is full hotspots need to, every time they make a P2P connection on the network, they need to sign a transaction to prove who they are. And that means full hotspots do a lot of operations with the 608. And it's possible that the single wire interface is not fast enough to support that. So it may be that you can only use, and maybe that you can use the single wire with light hotspot design, which again is supposed to be significantly less load. We're asking, who is it? Tektelic to do some testing to help prove what the transaction rate is on there. And then together we're all going to say, okay, it looks like you can do it, or no, it has to wait till light hotspots.
And we will know that, I would maybe even today.
Yeah, we might. Yeah,
Been
and we
tested.
should probably test it ourselves too, just to verify.
Yeah, we're also testing it ourselves.
Yeah. The DX83E08. I'm looking at it. One of the things I've been asking manufacturers do, as part of the due diligence of if you're going to use a hardware chip, we kind of want to see that it's been not only functionally tested but security tested. Meaning, there are some of these chips where you can make a really good crypto chip that is really easy to rip the keys out of. And those are twofold processes, right? One, make it so it works. The other things make certain that it doesn't get destroyed or can't be broken into. And I haven't seen any EAL labs or any security testing from a real penetration lab to test the DX83E08. So my opinion on that is until someone actually tested it, we see a report from some industry that is really on the attack side, who's really tested to see if it's secure and doesn't leak its keys. I don't feel comfortable approving a DX83E08 implementation. That was in the agenda here. Any hands so far? Cool. Light hotspots. Yeah.
Just one more update. We're also in the process of verifying a chip from Microchip, another ECC.
Yeah.
So that is still moving along.
Is that the special one?
Yeah. Yep. Which has also been publicly announced, but
it has?
Yeah.
Okay.
I accidentally sent out an email to everyone several months ago. It's still in process, and I imagine we should hopefully be done with what that is within the next few weeks.
Does everybody understand that also this might solve some supply chain issues for the 608?
Yes.
Vaguely, as vague as we can be. All right, cool. Sophie, it's yours because we got the light hotspot update.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, there's not really, the update is that we're auditing them. The audit process is nearly done. That's all moving along. The question that I have, we sent out an email to all manufacturers, and I'm working with Christina on sending out a new update to everybody about the light hotspots. We said in our original communication way back in October that we were going to approve light hotspot manufacturers in batches of 4. And we were going to approve their hardware in batches of 4, keep the hardware for audit until the firmware was complete on the Helium side, and then reapprove as a process. Like we would test their final firmware and then they would be approved for sales. So the first approval would allow manufacturers to know that their hardware was solid, their security chip has been tested, or security implementation has been tested, and they are approved insofar as they can get started ordering supplies. The second approval is approving for the network. So the question here is, first, I just wanted to bring that back up because that was a few months ago. And I'll put a link to that email that I sent out here in the notes in a minute. This other question is, do we want to keep it at batches of 4, or do we want to go to batches, say, of 8?
What do you mean by batch? Do you mean literally the number of units that come in and stay for testing?
No, I mean literally the number that we approve at the same time. And the reason for that is because we delayed auditing, or this process wasn't available until December 1st. It's unfair. So many of the manufacturers kind of basically arrived at the same time. So to approve them one by one.
Just one question. The number of different manufacturers, that's it? The batch is the number of different manufacturers.
Correct.
Okay.
4 light hotspots.
And is this for the first approval or the second approval?
Both. They would stay within the same group. Okay. No, actually, sorry, scratch that, because that's not practical. Just because who knows when they'll be done with the firmware. But certainly for the first group.
So, but the first group doesn't. That gate doesn't let them go sell. That gate lets them move forward with their manufacturing, their supply chain.
Yeah, and lets them know that they're basically going to be approved unless they don't deliver on the software side or for some other reason.
Right. So I'm just trying to understand what the implication is of the decision. So right now, if you kind of take a group of 4, the first 4, I suspect that submitted, you approve those for the first gate, then those guys can kind of maybe feel more confidence moving forward. And
Right.
then are you doing like are we doing 4 a week? Can we expand it? Like how many are in the backlog? Like how many are you guys are queued up waiting for you guys to get through the testing?
I think there's about 10 right now queued up,
Okay.
and every one of them is missing information. So there's,
Okay.
so let's just say what is practical and what I've seen with the full hotspots is when 4 to 6 is reasonable to expect that would be ready at the same time to go through. I'm proposing that rather than we approve in batches of 4, we do a batches of 6, and that's based on just back knowledge of when people submitted hotspots that we weren't ready for testing.
That's fine.
I mean, we're voting individually on each manufacturer, right?
Right, but voting as a batch means that nobody got ahead by shipping something before we were ready. And it also doesn't penalize them for us not being ready on the helium side. To be really specific, we have an auto update process that is part of audit. We don't have that test ready yet. There's a couple other tests, minor tests, that are just not ready yet. And so we don't want to penalize manufacturers.
I see. This is a way of keeping the priority that we promised.
Correct. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, Sophie, you mentioned that not all of them have submitted all the information, correct?
That's correct.
So I would say that as long as we tell them, if we only have about 10 waiting, as long as we tell them when we are going to do the vote or whatever, doing at least half of the prioritizing those that have already submitted all the information. If they don't submit, they only are voted on the next run.
Yes,
They
except
go
some
to the
of the
second batch.
information is things that we've just started asking. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we're working out the process with many of this first batch. So I think the thing is, we initially said 4. I'd like to raise that to 5 or 6. So
I
that's,
see no problem.
You're just setting the starting line at the same
Yeah.
place for a bigger group than before.
Correct.
And given the delays, it seems reasonable. And also, this is actually not the starting line to actually sell anyhow. It's kind of the preliminary warm up starting line. So I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Yeah, totally go with me. With no objections, I think it's officially passed, whatever that means. All right, hey, we're doing pretty good. We still have a little bit of time left. Let's see. Why don't we do this next one here about, okay, number 1, do we want to set a date for quarterly mock town hall meeting? I vote yes. And if everyone's cool with that, can y'all bring out your calendars right now and do you want to set it? Or we just kind of resolve, hey, really pay attention and we'll work on it in channel.
Yeah, we can just set it in channel. I mean, should we just
Okay.
pick like a standard day? It should be like the 3rd Thursday
Yeah.
of the month or so. I mean, let's just
Wait,
pick
this is for the quarterly town hall?
Yeah.
Yeah, the mock town hall.
Yeah.
Which sounds funny because it's not mock as in CK, but
I thought we were changing the name.
oh
Do
yeah.
we,
Oh, that's
is it worthwhile for us to do that? I mean, only thinking about just in terms of where this falls relative to this committee call. And then usually the community call is the week after that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like a Thursday after this call, like the 3rd.
Actually,
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably makes sense.
Or Monday after this call, right? On that rotating week, whatever it would be.
cool. That sounds relatively like we're on board with that. So everybody just make certain. I'm noticing that we had an entirely separate part of the document just called decisions, which I feel should be really way up there. Sorry if oh, those are things that are actually done. But there is one here, Christina, says make mock charter public final edits. Is that a thing
Yes, so the mock charter is almost done. Scott put some notes in there, but there are some things that need to be looked at by everybody before we make it public.
Okay, call to look at that if you haven't.
Yes.
I think I'm lagging behind on that. Okay, I'll give you an update on Codex. So, still we made that as a reminder. We decided that really because of the behavior and things that we saw with them, right? They were banned from selling hotspots for a year. Time served in some way, or if they followed certain procedures, it would be 6 months. And so that went into effect basically the beginning of November, if I'm correct, maybe October 27th. So as a result of that, we did take on significant burden in trying to allow them to serve orders which were made before the cutoff date, so that people who had ordered from them and who had no idea this was going on would be able to receive hotspots and onboard them. It's a significant process though, because we didn't quite trust Codex's data because of the behavior. So we kind of locked them into a process of revealing everything first and then reveal the criteria. And then we go through and continually cross-check as we go through each of these phases of onboarding. And I've been taking that on board and writing all of this as code so that, it's a lot of work. It's 6,000 or so, maybe even up to 10,000 hotspots we're dealing with. And rather than trying to make a manual process where I have to check each one, written this into code so that it runs from beginning to end and always cross-checks in each phase that one, an order matches something they've already given us before to the customer. If it's a large order, was pre-stated before. That way you can't break through this and suddenly start selling hotspots past the order date, right? That's the whole process. So we're now in the last phase where we all, if you remember, voted on the large orders, which is part of the ruling. And we denied some of them, we approved some of them. And the next step is for Codex to give us the onboarding keys that we can actually control which of those hotspots can be onboarded. And that is a big process for that large part, because it takes, I have to write even more code to go all the way back to the beginning to all of the documents they've given us and make certain everything fits in line. And unfortunately, things have not gone well. Last night, I was starting on this process and discovered from some users on Discord that they were holding hotspots and asking why they couldn't be onboarded. And these hotspots were recorded as actually going to a different manufacturer, going to a large order, different distributor. And that bugged me a bit because, again, we've asked Codex to absolutely tell us which hotspots are going to which order. And we're clearly seeing a mix up here. So I've stopped the process of allowing that update while we clear up with Codex what's going on. Why are end consumers who are part of small orders holding hotspots which have been stated to go to large orders in different countries? There's a giant mix up here, and we fortunately involved in cleaning it up. So that's the latest on Codex. Of course, people who have hotspots are getting really angry. They can't onboard them. The large hotspot owners likewise. So working through that, I CC'd everyone in the email so we can kind of see the problem. You're not required to understand everything in there, but I want everyone to see visibility in it and get involved in the process as much as you can. It is something that's eating up a lot of my time. It's driving me nuts, but we have to do it and be done with it. So I'm trying to make it so we are smooth with it, but also adhering to the ruling that we had, and hopefully never have to do that. That's really more of an update. Don't really require any input. Cool. We're nearly done. I don't really have any closing stuff. There's got to be any other pressing last minute issues, things you want to. Actually, Christina, are there, since you have done such a wonderful job of corralling us, are there pressing issues that we're not attending to, like in channel? Things we should be voting
No,
on?
I think that we're doing pretty good. I think the only thing that I would ask everybody to please do is just to read through the mock charter, because we just want to get that public for everybody. And I would like to put that out with also the ethics doc so that people we've had, I think, almost everybody sign it. I think there's a few that have been missing it, but for the most part, it's like 54 different people.
Scott. Cool.
Yeah, just a note on that charter, just a second to Christina's point about please review, please read. I think that it's a good time for us to all think about new committee members. So the charter sets forth where we can start to have more expertise from a rotating group of manufacturers. I also think we want to consider resellers in there. Obviously, just given CalChip's involvement in Parley Labs, I think that having involvement from both of those sides, and then I also think that Tim from Long AP could be a really great contributor in here. So as long as we think about the rules around having manufacturers and resellers in, if they are just recused from voting, or if it's certain voting conditions, let's just be mindful about that. But I think we do want to open up to having more expertise in here. There's a lot of different issues we're confronting as we talked about today. So that's part of my urgency to get that charter published so we can talk about where we get the next batch of folks to come and join and spread the work.
Yeah. A lot of workload.
Felipe.
Felipe.
Yeah, from that part, as long as we are sure there's no conflict of interest in kind of votes, or at least some of them come as advisor roles in order to assist, more than welcome. The more expertise we can get in the different fields, the easier it's to make decisions. And even those of us that are not aware or in-depth information in a field can benefit from that.
Yep, I'd say
Yeah,
comment in the doc on the conflicts issue.
Yeah, I don't think any of these would be voting rolls at all, but it would really just be a great place to hear very early objections like, my goodness, it's totally a crazy idea. We can't do that. They'll raise issues generally as manufacturers. And I think it's supportable. All right, well, we're in the usual position of actually like being just 1 minute over and being done with our workload. I feel a little weird about that. So
Great work, everybody.
that's good job.
I'm impressed.
Guys,
Let me do the Jamie thing. This is where we all unmute your microphones and clap and cheer. No, you don't have to do that. That would be hilarious.
Thank you, everybody.
I'll say goodbye,
Good to see
everyone.
you all.
Thanks,
See you,
everyone.
Jen.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.